Welcome to the Mind Gut Conversation, your go-to podcast for exploring cutting-edge ideas in optimal health and the fascinating science of mind-gut microbiome interactions. I'm your host, Emma Maya. Here we bring together thought leaders, groundbreaking researchers, and innovative practitioners to share insights that can transform the way you understand your body, mind, and overall well-being. Whether you're a health enthusiast, a curious learner, or a professional in the field, this podcast is your gateway to unlocking the secrets of the mind-gut connection. So settle in, open your mind, and join us as we journey into the science and stories shaping. Welcome to the Mind Gut Conversation podcast. Today I have the great pleasure to speak to my esteemed colleague, Dr. Robert Lustig, Emeritus Professor at the Department of Pediatrics at the University of California in San Francisco, author of 3 books, including the New York Times bestseller Fat Chance and Metabolical, and one of the most prominent and visible voices in the fight against sugar in the American diet. Dr. Lustig has fostered a global discussion of metabolic health and nutrition, exposing some of the leading myths that underlie the current pandemic of diet-related diseases. He believes that the food business, by pushing ultra-processed food loaded with sugar, has hacked our bodies and minds to pursue pleasure instead of happiness, fostering today's epidemics of addiction and other chronic diseases. Welcome to the show, Robert. It's a real pleasure to talk to you again. I think the last time we had a conversation was at least 2 years ago.
It's been a while. Yeah, we have to fix that.
And so many things have changed. My feeling is your view on sugar and what's going on with American health has not changed. But
Not only has it not changed, it's only become more fundamental and solidified.
do you think, I mean, let me just start out with this and then, we'll go to the topics that we have identified. Do you think so this term MAHA, Make American Healthy Again, has kind of entered the public conversation? It seems like, I mean, that seems like a good thing. I mean, just to raise awareness about it.
It's good that people understand that there's a problem. Okay, and that it is potentially um, uh, uh, fixable and reversible. That's wonderful. That has taken, my entire career to see that, germinate. Now, whether or not RFK Jr., in sort of blasting this out, is actually going to be able to turn this around. Just because you recognize a problem doesn't mean you can
Yeah,
fix it.
yeah.
So, I think the jury is still out there.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I feel the same way. I mean, it's definitely the positive side is that it's raising the awareness, and it will be a lot more
Yeah.
about this for the first time in really a long time.
Yeah.
And even though, I mean, you have been the leading voice really in talking about this and preaching it. I don't know how much, I mean, your books have been successful. But how much you reach the people that really need to know it,
Yeah, no,
that
this is a big issue, Emran. I'll be very honest with you. Like I've written 3 books and a cookbook, and they've done very well. And I'm not, poo-pooing that in any way, shape, or form. And they've delivered information to the public, and that's great. But the public that it's delivered it to is the New York Times crowd.
Mhm,
And to be honest with you, they're not the ones who need it.
mhm,
The
mhm.
people who need it aren't getting it. And to be honest with you, I'm not sure that even Maha is going to fix that either. So I think we still have a long way to go.
Yeah, let's talk about more, optimistic and practical
Okay.
topics, because otherwise,
I'm with you.
So we all agree too much sugar is bad. Uh,
Okay, we
there,
do agree with that.
there's different kinds of sugar, and I'm confronted with this question quite a bit. Um, which one is worse, fructose or glucose?
Oh, without question, fructose, 7 times worse. Now, that doesn't make glucose good, but you have to understand the biochemistry, and in order to understand the biochemistry, you have to understand the physics and the stereochemistry of the molecule. You have to understand the physiologic pathways. You have to understand the mitochondria. You have to understand clearance. You have to understand all the different organs in the body. This is a master class in metabolism to just understand the difference between fructose and glucose. Okay, it's not a little thing, it's a big thing. Now, the food industry would have you believe a calorie is a calorie, a sugar is a sugar. Okay, nothing could be further from the truth. And the thing is, I knew that in 1974, right? When I was in college. I
Mhm.
majored in nutritional biochemistry. And I knew that even when I was a college student, 17 years old. Okay, I am now 67 years old. So this 50 years ago. And the fact of the matter is, it hasn't made it into the medical literature. It hasn't made it into medical school education. It hasn't made it into clinical practice. And here we are 50 years later. This is insane. The fact of the
How,
matter is,
I mean,
when I was,
how is this possible?
oh,
That
easy.
an academic authority like yourself, I mean, if somebody said this, obviously, yeah, I would believe it, but somebody like yourself has been promoting this and written about it um, as an academic. Why has the academic community not caught on to this?
Very clearly, I know the answer to that one because 80% of medical education is underwritten by big pharma. They don't want it in medical school. There is no nutrition education in medical school. Every
Mm.
time I asked a nutrition question during medical school, because I majored in nutrition in college, okay, I'd get booed and hissed by the other students, and the teachers would say, that's not important. We don't need to, belabor that. That's not how we take care of patients.
And
And
is this ultimately because there's such economic interests behind that
I think so. I think so. If you could prevent a disease, that's a whole lot less money Big Pharma's making.
yeah.
So I
Yeah, there
think I
seems to
think it
be,
serves their interests.
I mean, there seems to be, a general, you know, I mean, a general awareness that our chronic disease epidemic is really something that is the best thing ever that could happen to the pharmaceutical industry and the agricultural industry. I mean, I hate to be a sort of a conspiracy theorist, but
Well,
it's obvious, and also the solutions now with, we'll come to that topic later with medications that for the first time allows people to lose weight, which is already, has made Denmark richer, or the Novo
it sure has.
richer than all
I
countries.
don't know if it's made Denmark richer. It certainly made Novo Nordisk richer. It
Yeah.
is now, the gross national product of Novo Nordisk is greater than the entire country of Denmark. I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah, it is crazy. It is
Yeah.
crazy.
Um, yeah. Look, the fact of the matter is, once upon a time, someone said to me, I think the food industry is in bed with the pharma industry. I think the food industry is making the disease so the pharma can treat it. And they're, basically glad handing each other. And I said to them, there's no way that they're colluding. There's no way that they're in bed with each other. The pharma industries just recognizes a problem. They see the market niche and they're just trying to, fill it. And the more I research this and the more I know, and the more I know about the corporate determinants of health, and we actually now have a center here at UCSF called the Center to End Corporate Harm,
Hmm.
CECH.
Wow.
Okay. We have, it's a organized research unit. It's led by Tracy Woodruff, who's in public health and reproductive and the environment. Um, and I'm a, charter member of this. Fact of the matter is, we now have the industry documents library so that we can actually go into what the various industries knew and when they knew it and how they were communicating with each other. And so we actually have documents now that, you know, show us that in fact there was collusion, that
Hmm.
there is, information being passed back and forth. Perfect example of this is when the tobacco industry bought, components of the food industry back in the 1980s. When Philip Morris became Altria, and owned General Foods, and R.J. Reynolds owned Kraft and Nabisco. And the fact is that they used the science of addiction that they'd learned in tobacco to increase the hyperpalatability of foods to increase sales. And we can demonstrate that. We can show that. Colleagues at the University of Kansas, Tara Fazzino, has written several papers and actually just wrote a paper this week that appeared on infant formula and how it's spiked with sugar. It's supposed to have lactose. It's spiked with sucrose,
Hmm.
very specifically to get the baby to eat it, to brand them for life, and to alter neural circuits,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know, early on in development. This is a disaster. Okay. They know what they're doing. They've known what they've been doing forever. So, in fact, this is something that has to come to the fore, and you know, partly my job, partly yours.
Yeah, I mean, it's shocking, really. So I don't want to get into a discussion because you just emphasized how, complicated and deep-rooted the influence of fructose is on metabolism and mitochondrial function, so many other things. But one practical question. So people always associate fructose with fruit, and so, as you know, I'm a big fan of the Mediterranean style diet,
Yeah.
not necessarily the Italian diet,
Right.
which
The
is not,
Mediterranean diet and the Italian diet are not the same.
are
People
not the
need to
same.
understand they are not the same.
And but these dietary patterns propose consumption of a large variety of fruits and vegetables.
Right.
So if you eat a lot of fruits in this diet, is the fructose in these fruits bad for you?
Okay. So the molecule is the same. There's no difference in the molecule. All right. The amount is different. Okay. Because the amount of fructose in fruit is actually not that large because fructose is so sweet. You don't have to put a whole lot. God didn't have to put a whole lot of it in to make it palatable. So, berries have the least amount, and, pineapple probably has the most amount, and, grapes have, little bags of sugar. So, but the fact of the matter is that wherever there's fructose in nature, there's also its inherent fiber. And the fiber turns out to be the antidote because what fiber does is it prevents fructose absorption in the intestine so that even though you consumed it, even though it passed your lips, even though it counted as nutrients entering your body, it actually didn't enter your bloodstream. It
Mhm.
entered your intestine.
Mhm.
But just because it entered your intestine doesn't mean it entered you.
Mhm.
Because your intestine, is basically outside your body. We can talk about, that gut-brain axis, and I'm no doubt we will. But the fact is, if it stays in the intestinal lumen and doesn't get absorbed, it does not induce those metabolic perturbations. So the fact that the fiber is still associated with the fruit actually mitigates the negative metabolic outcomes. So we have data, and numerous people have data to basically show that the absorption can go down by 35 to 40% if the fiber is still associated with the fruit. But as soon as you squeeze it, and turn it into juice, now it might as well be drinking a soda because the uh, sucrose absorption is immediate. The sucrase cleaves it in about a nanosecond as soon as it enters the duodenum, and you absorb the two molecules. And then you're off to the races in terms of metabolic perturbation and mitochondrial dysfunction that we know that fructose does. So fruit is good, juice is bad. How's that?
So the glass of orange juice in the morning is not good for you.
Not a good idea. Eat the orange.
Mhm.
Eat the orange. Another thing is that fruit is self-limiting. So my friend, colleague, and co-writer of my cookbook, Cindy Gershon, she's a nutrition educator in the East Bay and teaches in low Title I schools, high schools. And the first class in her nutrition education class is always the same every year. She takes two kids from the class, and most of these kids are, haven't eaten breakfast because they're poor and, they can barely get to school on time. And she takes two kids from the class and she hands each kid 6 oranges. And she says to the first kid, "Okay, kid, here's 6 oranges. Make juice." So the kid juices the 6 oranges, gets 12 and a half ounces, drinks the whole thing down, says, "Okay, what's for breakfast?" She says to the second kid, "Okay, kid, here's 6 oranges. Eat the 6 oranges." Kid eats orange number one, orange number two, orange number three, gets to orange number four and throws up,
Mhm.
vomits right there in the classroom. Okay. She's got the vomit basin ready because she knows it's coming. Okay. And it's always on orange number four. And the kid goes, "Oh my God, I'm gonna die." And then the kid doesn't eat lunch or dinner either. So, like, what happened? The fiber happened.
Yeah.
Okay. The fiber was self-limiting. The fiber prevented you from being able to do that because the fiber moved the food through the intestine faster. You got the satiety signal sooner. And so you couldn't eat the 6 oranges. So when you're consuming fruit, I'm really not worried about the fructose because absorption's low and satiety's high. But when you turn it into juice, then basically it's the same thing as a soda.
So basically, I mean, that kind of leads me to my next question. It's processed oranges, and there's been a lot of discussion about the bad side of processing, and I would say, you can't really. Orange juice is a good example that even simple processing, is not good for you. If you had ultra processed orange juice, there would be all kinds of supplements added to it and stabilizers and whatever. But
Right.
um, so this topic of processed food and particularly ultra processed foods has received a lot of attention, and in two ways. One is that people say, and there's studies on that it's really ultra processed food that's so the main culprit of the negative culprit of the Western diet. And then there's critics, there's
Yeah.
nutritionists, academic nutritionists to say this is some complete garbage, this ultra processed food. What do
There,
you
there,
stand on?
there will always be the naysayers. Okay. Just know nothing's ever for sure. Okay. Everything's in flux. And this topic is in flux as well. Here's what I can say. We don't have a hard and fast definition of ultra processed food yet. That is true. We don't. Um, Carlos Montero, our colleague who's professor of public health at the University of Sao Paulo, developed this classification system based on the degree of processing called the NOVA system. It is the best method for being able to categorize processing. Um, And, the easiest way to explain the Nova system to your listeners is with an example. So there are 4 classes within Nova. We'll take an example. Let's take an apple. Okay. Class 1 would be an apple picked off a tree. Class 2 would be apple slices, destemmed, deseeded, maybe deskinned. Class 3 would be apple sauce, macerated, maybe a preservative added, possibly some added sugar, maybe not. Class 4 would be a McDonald's apple pie. Okay? Now, how much Class 1 apple is in that Class 4 McDonald's apple pie? Well, only McDonald's knows for sure.
Mhm.
And the likelihood is not very much, if any. But the question is, which of those classes confers metabolic dysfunction and ill health? And the answer is only Class 4. And Carlos has done numerous epidemiological correlative studies around the world, okay, showing that Class 4 ultra-processed food category is correlated, not causative, correlated with virtually every chronic metabolic disease that we know. So, type 2 diabetes, hypertension, dyslipidemia, cardiovascular disease, cancer, dementia, fatty liver disease, polycystic ovarian disease, depression, metabolic syndrome, premature death, across the board. Pick your metabolic disease because all those diseases are mitochondrial diseases. And none of those diseases have cures. And the reason is because you can only prevent those diseases. You can't cure them. And the reason is because we don't have medicines to go to the mitochondria. The only thing that gets to the mitochondria is food. And the food can either help the mitochondria or it can hurt the mitochondria. And so it turns out all of those ultra-processed foods hurt the mitochondria. Now, the question is why? Why do those ultra-processed foods hurt the mitochondria? And are there foods that are not in class 4 that also hurt the mitochondria? Are there foods in class 4 that don't hurt the mitochondria? This is ultimately the question that needs to be answered. And I will tell you what my opinion, based on my research, says. There are 3 precepts to metabolic health, to diet and metabolic health. And here they are. Protect the liver, feed the gut, support the brain. Those 3. Okay? Protect the liver, feed the gut, support the brain. Why those 3? If you look at the studies in the literature where any of those 3 are fixed, then the downstream organs from those also get fixed. So if you fix the gut, the liver, and the brain, you have fixed the heart, you have fixed the kidney, you have fixed, the pancreas and everything else that is downstream of it. Those are primary. Conversely, if you try to fix the pancreas, if you try to fix the heart, if you try to fix, the kidney, those other 3 don't get fixed.
Mhm.
That's why those are primary, okay, as opposed to secondary. So any food that does all 3, protect the liver, feed the gut, support the brain, is by definition healthy, whether it's ultra processed or not. Any food that does none of the 3 is poison, whether it's ultra processed or not. And any food that does 1 or 2, but not all 3, is going to be somewhere in the middle. And the data in the NOVA system and other data that have been applied to this as well that we've done using a recommendation engine that we developed called Perfect, which kind of goes along with NOVA, demonstrates the same thing. So what I think, based on our data and our clinical experience and my clinical experience, is that the reason ultra-processed food is bad is not because it's ultra-processed, but because it floods the liver, starves the gut, and destroys the brain. Now, the question then is, could you re-engineer ultra-processed food with those 3 precepts as directives and end up leading to an ultra processed food product that was actually metabolically healthy? And the answer to that is absolutely, and we've already done it.
Can you give an example for that?
We've been working uh, for the last 5 years with an offshore food company in the Middle East. Okay, it's the Nestle of the Middle East. It's called Kuwaiti Danish Dairy Company. And, you know, they make all sorts of crap. They make all sorts of bad food. They make flavored milks, they make frozen yogurt, they make ice cream, they make biscuits, confectionery, tomato sauce. Okay, I like all that stuff. All right. And Kuwait had an 18% diabetes rate and an 80% obesity rate. And they came to me back in 2020 during the pandemic and said, look, we understand this problem. We understand that we are part of the problem and we don't want to be. We want to be part of the solution. Not only that, we want to lead. We want to be the prototypical food company that turns itself around to demonstrate to the rest of the food industry that they can do this too. We want to be a metabolically healthy company. Wow. Okay. And we're willing to put the money behind the effort because we're a privately held company. We don't have any stock. We don't have any shareholders. We have to placate. Okay. We can take the long view. The only shareholders are the CEO and his sister, who's the CFO. That's it. They own the company. So they could do it. So, wow, okay. So I convened a scientific advisory team, some people whom you might know. Um, Tim Harlan, who's the head of culinary medicine at George Washington University. Rachel Gao, who is a PhD RD nutritionist, was the person who did the omega-3 for ADD trial at the NIH. Andreas Kornstadt, who is a computer scientist out of Stanford. Wolfram Alderson, whom you might know, my colleague, who's also my social media director, full disclosure. He actually ended up going to work for KDD to institute these changes, and me. And we, over the course of the last 5 years, have been working with KDD. By the way, I take no money from this, conflict of interest. So
Mhm.
I do this, gratis. But basically, we have identified the obstacles and the solutions to turning ultra processed food into healthy food. And I can sum them up in four things that you have to do to turn ultra processed food into healthy food. Now, right now, we're not doing any of those, but we could do all four of them and actually make ultra processed food healthy. And here they are. Get rid of the sugar, add the fiber, add the omega-3s, and get rid of the emulsifiers.
Mm.
Those four things. Now, could you make ultra processed food with less sugar, more fiber, add omega-3s, and fix the emulsifier problem? Yes, you could. And they are. And so they have turned over 10% of their entire portfolio, 18 items thus far, and continuing in order to be metabolically healthy. And we have tested those items to actually show that their glucose and insulin excursion are lower, okay, and that they acutely, at least, demonstrate less metabolic and oxidative stress.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. I mean, it's fascinating that a company would embark on something like that, which is,
No, I
yeah.
know. So we're hoping and we're trying to get the food industry to understand that they can change themselves. They can re, you know, organize. They can re-engineer. That they can ultimately flip in the same way that KDD did, and that they can ultimately be part of the solution as well. We just presented in Davos, uh, last month to demonstrate to the public what we did, how we did it, why we did it, and to try to, get traction, in within the food industry.
This episode is brought to you by Seed. I often talk about the gut brain connection and how gut health is fundamental to our overall well being. We all know our gut is essential for absorption and digestion, but less is known about its crucial role in metabolism, immunity, and even in the fluctuations of our mood. So, how do we best support our gut? While a diet rich in diverse fiber and fermented foods is ideal, sometimes life gets in the way and we could all use some additional support. That's where Seed's DS-01 Daily Symbiotic comes in. As someone who has always been skeptical of the myriad of probiotic products offered in stores and on the internet, I can tell you that many of them don't survive the harsh environment of the stomach and the long transit through the small intestine to reach where they need to go, the large intestine. DS-01 stands out because it contains both a number of validated probiotic strains together with a prebiotic, and it features a proprietary capsule-in-capsule technology designed to ensure the bacteria actually make it to your colon. What I appreciate most is that DS-01 is backed by rigorous preclinical and clinical research, not just marketing claims. That is the main reason I joined Seed's Clinical Advisory Board. Supporting your gut health is a journey. It always starts with diet, exercise, and overall lifestyle, but sometimes a high-quality symbiotic can be an important tool. If you're considering one, I always recommend choosing a product that is backed by science like DS-01. If you'd like to try it, Seed is offering 25% off your first month with the code MAYOR25. Yeah, that's really remarkable. Would you say that you listed four ingredients, but would you say that the sugar is sort of number one? Get rid of the
Yeah.
sugar.
Yeah. I think get rid of the sugar is number one. Okay. Because sugar is a mitochondrial toxin. And what we've learned is that you can add whatever you want to try to make the food better. But if you don't take the sugar out, it doesn't matter. Okay. The way I describe it to people is toxin A plus antidote B still equals death.
Mhm.
All right. Ultimately, if the antidote is not directed at the problem, it doesn't matter what you do about it. It's still going to kill you.
So that brings me to the next question. So, in most of your career and your publications, you're focused on the sugar, but what about, so there's these other factors that we know play a
Yeah,
role, like lifestyle factors and
sure.
portion sizes,
Yep.
um, almost absent physical activity, chronic
Right.
stress.
Yep.
Uh,
All the above. All the above, they're all important. They are all important. And I don't discount any of them. And I think that they all need to be addressed. What's interesting is that when you address the diet, a lot of the others change. For instance, you mentioned chronic stress. Does diet affect stress? Oh, you bet it does.
yeah,
Okay. How does diet affect stress? Well, turns out sugar actually depletes ATP and causes irritability and depression in the brain.
yeah,
Okay. How about tryptophan? If you're tryptophan deficient, it makes you irritable as well, and you tend to make bad decisions. Okay. In addition, sugar, by raising dopamine, you're basically, fomenting, continued consumption via this addiction pathway. So could, uh, uh, changing your diet ultimately have impacts on stress perception and ultimately stress reduction? The answer is absolutely yes. We also demonstrated that when we get the sugar down, people's energy goes up. So you might want to exercise.
mhm, mhm,
So if you actually look at the studies, now these studies are in children, not adults. So I'll take it with a grain of salt. I only have the data for children. But when you actually do the R value on dietary change versus exercise, okay, the R value for dietary change and improvement in metabolic health is 0.65, so a 35% improvement. Whereas the R value for exercise and metabolic health is 0.75, 25% improvement. So they both work,
mhm.
but in fact, diet's more important than exercise. And I actually debated Dan Cooper from UC Irvine on this last year, and I won
Yeah, so
to his great chagrin.
yeah, one thing that I often think about is, looking back. So the way that I grew up in a small town, actually, in a family of confectionaries, so it was all about sweets. Like
Okay,
over several generations, I think it's
okay.
6 or 7 generations, and so I'm
And
the
look
one who
and look
stopped.
what you do now.
Yeah, I'm the one who stopped that family tradition. And so I often think back about is, I worked from early on as a student in the bakery, and it wasn't making bread, it was making fancy chocolates and all these. Uh,
Ooh, I want your job.
yeah, and so I look at pictures, and obviously being there in this place, I ate my share of chocolates, and went to the storage area where these big blocks of chocolate were. And so my consumption of sugary things was pretty high. But then I look at our lifestyle at the time. This was a small town in the foothills of the Alps.
Mhm.
So we every weekend we went into the mountains for hikes and climbs. In wintertime for skiing every single weekend.
Yep.
And we didn't drive there, we actually walked there. So going skiing meant walking there for 1.5 hours and walking back for 1.5 hours. Um, and we trained for the skiing season by going twice, to the gym. And so nobody was obese at the time, and these chronic diseases did not exist either. So I think
Was this in Switzerland or Germany or where?
in southern Germany, so it was south of Munich.
Okay, okay. So the altitude's already high. I mean, it's like Garmisch or around
Yeah,
there.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So the altitude's already a little high. So here's a question for you, Emran. Okay. The Swiss and the Germans have the same diet, basically. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
it's Kalbsbraten mit Schlag. Okay. It's all right. And veal with cream sauce and a lot of carbohydrate. All right. That's what over potatoes or bread, whatever. Okay. They both have the same crappy diet. Okay. The Swiss have a 9% obesity rate, and the Germans have an 18% obesity rate. So the Germans are half as obese as the Swiss are half as obese as the Germans are, but they have the same crappy diet. Why is that? Two
Yep.
reasons.
I mean, part of it is you would have to compare the Swiss with the southern Germans living, close to the Alps. I mean, it's
Indeed. Well, so the Swiss and the Southern Germans are going to be much more alike than, say, the Northern Germans.
yeah,
Exactly
yeah.
right. So the question is why? And the answer is cold and altitude.
Hmm. Interesting.
Cold and altitude, because the cold activates the sympathetic nervous system, which drives PPR gamma coactivator 1 alpha, sorry, PGC 1 alpha, okay, which increases lipolysis for one, and also the altitude by inducing hypoxia actually increases mitochondrial biogenesis. So you end up burning more, in part because of that sympathetic outflow. So the fact is, because Switzerland and southern Germany is cold and high, by the way, the same thing's true in Colorado. Okay. Everyone, looks at the map of America, the CDC maps of America in terms of percent obesity and goes, why is Colorado less obese? Oh, because they, go skiing on weekends. No, no, no. It's because it's cold and high. All right. For the same reason. So, there is shall we say, a facilitation, in our metabolic uh, priming based on both cold and altitude. So you got lucky.
Yeah. So yeah, I often think back about this. I mean, in some ways, the diet was the basic patterns, the macro components were not healthy, but but the ingredients, we didn't have any of the stuff that's being mixed into it
Sure.
now. It was from the farmers, farm to table
Right.
generally, and so there
Yes.
were a lot of things in addition to that. But thanks for that explanation. So I'm always looking for reasons.
Right. And in Colorado, they're very high.
Yeah. So you talked about a list of mechanisms, I don't know, six or eight,
Oh, eight. Eight.
uh, eight
Yeah.
underlying the metabolic dysfunction associated with
Right.
obesity. So
Right.
my question is, maybe you could just list them briefly and then I
Sure.
ask you a question.
Sure. In my book, Metabolical, I basically outline the diseases that aren't diseases. Okay. These are the subcellular pathologies that we don't have um, blood tests for, but that are going on inside cells that are ultimately contributing both to aging and metabolic syndrome because they're virtually identical. And the eight are glycation, so the binding of carbohydrate to protein, oxidative stress, because every time that reaction occurs, you release a little oxygen radical, a little reactive oxygen species, which can do damage, can also change energy metabolism because it's altering phosphorylation status of the important energy regulating enzymes of the cell. So PI3 kinase, AMP kinase, mTOR. Okay, so those are all kinases. And so when you have changes in ROSs, you have changes in phosphorylation status, which ultimately change the direction of energy metabolism. Number three, mitochondrial dysfunction itself. So you're basically not 100% efficient. So you end up with, you know, too much substrate and no place to go other than to go to fat. Insulin resistance, which is the basically downstream manifestation of mitochondrial dysfunction, membrane instability, so basically changes in neuronal structure and neurotransmission that ultimately lead to changes in the brain, inflammation, and that can be from gut or systemic, and can also be from reactive oxygen species, methylation, okay, which will basically alter signal transduction and transcription, in terms of nuclear messaging signaling. And finally, the last one, autophagy, which I think is extraordinarily important, where you're basically recycling, you know, dead and senescent parts of the cell in order to, allow for the space to create new ones. So all of those are contributing to our ultimate demise. From the day we're born to the day we die, those are the eight processes that take us from cradle to grave. And the question is, you can't stop any of them, but can you slow them down? And the answer is yes, you can. You can slow them down. And if you slow them down, you live longer.
Mm.
And that's been shown, 50 ways from Sunday at this point. So the question then is, okay, are there ways to slow them down that are easy? And the answer is yeah, real food. Are there ways to speed them up to make you die quick? And the answer is yeah, processed food. And the question then is, are any of these eight pathways that I just mentioned, are there drugs for them? And the answer is no. And the reason is because all of these are mitochondrial dysfunction and no drugs get to the mitochondria. No drugs fix the mitochondria. If we had a drug that fixed the mitochondria, we wouldn't have this problem. So these eight pathologies are not druggable, but they are foodable. And that's the only way to deal with this problem. There is no cure, there is no treatment, there is only prevention. And the signal prevention, the sentinel prevention is food.
One category, I mean, it's not a process, it's really a component that in my opinion is, as you know, I'm a big fan of the microbiome that
Yes,
has
I
been
know.
missing whether
Me
whether
too, by the way.
um, so I mean the whole microbial science that's evolving, which is sort of a um, some people call it like another organ that we have, which I don't really share. But what role do you assign to the gut microbiome as far as we know today? We're obviously just scraping on the surface of that science, but
Right. So I think the microbiome is extraordinarily important, and we're still learning about it because we don't really understand it yet. Okay. Um, the one thing I can say is that the microbiome has one thing called diversity. Okay. And then the other thing is output. So the types of bacteria and viruses and fungi that are in your gut and what they do there and their relative relationships with each other, because some of them are symbiotic and some of them are not. Some of them are pathobiotic. Like for instance, C. difficile, when it takes over
mm,
your gut, you're screwed. All right. That's microbiome and it's bad microbiome. All right. And there are things, that make that happen, like antibiotics. All right. So because they're wiping out everything else and they give the C. difficile a foothold to basically take over. Well, there are antibiotics in all of our food because they gave antibiotics to the meat, to the animals,
yeah, yeah.
before slaughter. And so, we're altering our microbiome on that score. So this question of diversity. And then the other question is, what do they make? Okay, they're all little factories and they make stuff. And what we call those things that they make, we call them postbiotics. Okay, now the postbiotic that we have the most data on is butyrate, the short chain fatty acids.
Mm,
So basically, the microbiome, the bacteria in your intestine, make short chain fatty acids or not, depending on what. What does it depend on as to whether they make this good thing or not? And the answer is if you gave them the food for it.
mm,
If you give them the food for it, they make them. And what's the food for the bacteria? The fiber. So people think fiber is what you throw in the garbage after you juice the fruit. No, the fiber is the food for the bacteria.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So, people think it's not necessary. It's absolutely necessary because you got to feed your bacteria. And if you don't feed your bacteria will feed on you because they don't want to die. Okay. And if you're starving them, okay, they will find another food source. So what do they find? They find the mucin layer
Mm, mm,
that covers the intestine and epithelial cells, okay, as a physically protective barrier. And what they do is they chew up the mucin layer and then they denude those intestinal epithelial cells and they make it much more likely that those bacteria can then basically get between the cells through the pockets in between that are normally protected by these proteins called tight junctions, but sometimes those tight junctions don't work, and we'll get there in a minute. Okay. Or they can secrete all sorts of, toxins that somehow can make it across as well, and you end up in the with stuff in the bloodstream, lipopolysaccharides, whole bacteria, and these ultimately lead to gut inflammation and then systemic inflammation. And once you have systemic inflammation, you have insulin resistance because the inflammatory process is in and of itself an insulin resistant pathway, and there are reasons why. So, if you can feed your gut, if you can basically provide the fiber to feed those bacteria so that they can make the short chain fatty acids, so that they protect your gut and also, by the way, protect your brain, because those tight junctions in the gut are the same as the tight junctions in the brain that lead to the blood-brain barrier. So you have a gut-blood barrier, you have a blood-brain barrier. They're the same. So it's no surprise that if you harm your gut, you're going to harm your brain too. In addition, on top of that, we also have the postbiotics that travel via the nerves. And that primary nerve that does that is the afferent vagus. And so we now know that there are compounds that are carried via the afferent vagus nerve from the intestinal lumen up to the nucleus tractus solitarius, which is the way station in the brain. Okay, and then that fans out all over the brain to the amygdala, to the prefrontal cortex, etc. So that's called interoception. In simple, parlance, we call that gut feeling. Okay, that's your gut feeling. And the fact is that those are postbiotics that ultimately lead to changes in behavior as well. The most important of those, I think, is serotonin. Most of the serotonin in your body is in your gut. Okay, very little of it is in your brain, but in fact, some of it gets up there. So the way I look at it is the microbiome is basically a little mini brain of its own, and it is also a factory for all these things that ultimately affect your brain. So you can't cut it out of the health equation. It's absolutely essential. But the easy way to fix the microbiome is give it the food it needs. And that food is fiber. And that's one of the reasons I harp on fiber.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm really glad we seem to be on 100% on the same wavelength. I mean, my personal journey to that point has really been, as a gastroenterologist, being focused on the gut, not on gut health in the beginning, but on gut diseases like
Yeah,
ulcers and inflammation.
sure.
Um, but I think my journey has taken me to a point that sometimes I'm sort of afraid as a scientist, having ended up this way, that you try to explain a lot of phenomena based on the same mechanisms. I mean, you've done the same thing, in a similar way. For me, it's been this whole cascade of food, um, microbes, gut-associated immune system, and immune activation that doesn't stay in the gut, but then is distributed to all the other organs.
Indeed.
So, my string theory of chronic disease is sort of focused really on this connection, that this I mean, you listed three organs, so the brain, the gut, and the liver. I've not spent that much time on the liver, but I am aware it plays a big role. But certainly the brain gut connection is something that I think we have not appreciated enough for a long time. Certainly not as a gastroenterologist and not as a psychiatrist, because we've not made this connection. So I think it's kind of interesting to me how these different theories that you have, more focused on the metabolism, and mine more focused on the microbiome, immune interaction, that they really converge. I mean,
Oh,
it's
absolutely. Ultimately, it's metabolic health and gut health. I mean, that's what confers systemic health and
yeah,
mental health, by the way.
yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
is when you fix your metabolism and you fix your gut, everything else gets better too. And that's when systemic and mental health, and by the way, societal health improves as well. So that's what we should be focused on. So, what improves metabolic health? Well, get the dopamine down, get the tryptophan up, serotonin up, and reduce cortisol. Those are the things that improve metabolic and mental health. And the things that improve gut health are fiber and um, reduction in exposure to toxins. So how do you know, put all those together? And the answer is real food.
Yeah, it's interesting that there's a simple answer. I mean, sometimes I think about it, even having spent my whole life chasing after NIH grants and trying to prove that these little components are important, and
Well, that,
there's still
that's
this
because you have
optimism.
all that's because you have all these naysayers who are, screaming about ultra processed food, being the problem, when in fact it is the problem. It's
Yeah,
just that ultra processed food is a problem because it doesn't address these three precepts.
yeah,
Feed, protect the liver, feed the gut, support the brain. Are there, non-processed foods that also address, that, don't fit those three precepts? Sure. Are there ultra processed foods that do, fit those three precepts? We're making them a KDD. So I think that ultimately the Nova system will have served its purpose to alert people as to what the problem is. But ultimately, what I think we need is a re-engineering of our food supply to address metabolic and gut health. And when we do that, we will also address climate change and societal health as well.
Yeah, I mean, this would be a whole other topic for the conversation, the planetary implications of our discussion,
Yep.
which is, I mean, we're doing the same thing to the planet as we do to our bodies,
Indeed. No
so,
difference.
so we started talking about this a little bit at the beginning, but so in my opinion, I mean, you mentioned one example is KBD, which is an exception, but in my opinion, it's unlikely that Americans, in particular the food industry, will make major changes anytime soon in their consumption of sugar and producing sugary products, ultra-processed products.
Well, that's a that's an assumption, and obviously, based on previous track record, that's a good assumption. But I will tell you, just between you, me, and the lamppost, and by the way, all your viewers, okay, the food industry knows. They know. They have denied it for 50 years, but they know. And I know they know because they've told me they know, because they invited me to be the keynote speaker last October at the fourth annual Sugar Reduction Summit for the industry. They asked
Oh,
me to be the keynote speaker. Okay. Like I'm like their worst enemy, right? I'm their worst
yeah,
nightmare.
yeah,
They asked me to be the keynote speaker at this thing. Okay. And they know what they haven't yet figured out is what they're going to do about it. But they know. All right. And, admitting it is half the battle. So they're trying to figure out what the correct um, modalities for mitigating the metabolic mayhem are. And, sugar reduction strategies basically break up into five big buckets: remove, reduce, replace, boost, block. And there are different modalities in each of those five buckets. And different ones will ultimately be appropriate for different products. And they're trying to figure out which ones will work for which, and can they, institute those and substitute those and, have the public not notice because they don't want to admit that their food is shit,
yeah, yeah,
even though it is, and they know it is. Okay, but they can't admit it because if they admit it, number one, they lose market share. Number two, the lawsuits start flowing in. So they can't admit it, but they are looking for solutions. I know they are because I'm trying to help them do that. Now, can RFK with Maha help motivate them to do that? The answer is possibly. We'll see.
yeah. I mean, that's a whole other topic. I mean, my concern is sort of very, I think, almost like a friendship between RFK and one of the leading supplement functional medicine preachers in the country. And obviously, if you want to use sell your supplements, it's not necessarily supporting healthy food.
Well,
It's
right. So yeah, I'm not for supplements per se. Okay. Toxin A plus antidote B still equals death. You can take all the supplements till the cows come home. If you don't fix the sugar problem, it doesn't really matter. Okay. Got to fix the food first.
yeah. So, do you think in the interim, as a short-term solution, so there's a lot of talk and a lot of publicity and a lot of billions of revenue generated with a GLP-1 agonist and GIP agonists. And do
Yeah.
you think this is a valuable interim solution until, the food industry has changed? And
So, GLP-1s are hard. And the reason they're hard is because um, how I feel about them depends on which hat I'm wearing. I wear three hats. Okay. So, first hat, clinician hat. Second hat, scientist hat. Third hat, public health advocate hat. Okay. And how I feel about GLP-1s depends on which hat I'm wearing. So when I'm wearing my clinician hat, I say, hey, I'm glad they're here. They work.
Mm.
You can get a lot of weight loss. And, not only that, but it seems to have beneficial effects on, liver fat and heart disease and diabetes and depression, maybe. First, we thought it caused depression, but, the data is not, strong for that. Um, so maybe it's good. And for the morbidly obese who've tried everything else, this is a viable alternative because it's better than death. All right. So from a clinician standpoint, I'm glad they're here. Now, from a scientist standpoint, why do they work? Why do these GLP-1 agonists, whether it's, semaglutide or tirzepatide, not important. Why do they work? And the answer is they work in two places. The first place they work is on the nucleus accumbens, ventral tegmental area to the nucleus accumbens. They basically interfere with the reward pathway. Okay, so they stop the food noise. And that's good. That's very good. And they make you not crave sugar, which is also good. Those are good things. So I'm not against those. I'm for them. And it's, by the way, that's one of the reasons why they're now using GLP-1s as a treatment for alcoholism and for
Yeah.
smoking,
Yeah.
and because they're interfering with that reward pathway. Okay, and that might be a very good thing. Now, we once upon a time, Emma, you probably remember this. Once upon a time, we had a medicine that interfered with the reward pathway. Okay, it was called Rimonabant. It was
Mm.
2006. It was made by Sanofi, and it was approved in the European Union for treatment of obesity, and it worked. And it worked about as well as semaglutide in terms of weight loss. It was a really good drug from a weight loss standpoint, right? And it got approved in the European Union, never here. And then, as soon as it was approved, within 2 months, there were 21 suicides,
Mm. Mm.
and they took it off the market. And the reason it worked was for the exact same reason that they were committing suicide. Because when you interrupt the reward pathway, life's not worth living.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
It induced a major depressive disorder and caused people to basically give up and throw themselves off roofs.
yeah.
21 suicides in 2 months on this drug. And of course, the drug got recalled, and that was the end of that. Right? So interfering with reward is definitely a dicey deal. It might be good, but it also might not. And we're going to have to, keep post-marketing on, mental health issues, open for a long time on this. And there are studies that suggest that there's an increased risk of depression, but we haven't seen actual suicide with GLP-1s. So we're going to keep an eye on this. Now, the second reason they work, they affect the GI tract. They delay gastric emptying. And that's not a bug, that's a feature. They delay gastric emptying. And if they delay gastric emptying, that means you can't put more food into the stomach before the stomach revolts. And that's why you get nausea and you get vomiting, which are pretty much across the board with these drugs. But it's also why you get pancreatitis. And it's also why you get gastroparesis, 3.9% increased risk of gastroparesis. Stomach turns to stone. And some of those people who get gastroparesis, when you take the medicine away, they don't get better.
Mm.
This is a problem. It's a big problem. And we don't know who they are yet, So it's they're trying to downplay this. They don't even put this on their package insert that this is a potential problem, but it is. And there's a lawsuit against Novo Nordisk right now over gastroparesis. So that's not so good. In addition, you lose weight. Agreed. What is the weight that you lose? You lose half fat, half muscle. Now, losing fat is good, but losing muscle is not. And we know that losing muscle actually increases your risk of dying. Okay, sarcopenia is one of the primary drivers of ultimate demise. Okay. Insulin resistance leads to sarcopenia. Sarcopenia is a problem. Okay. You basically replace muscle with fat. That's not good. And, we haven't figured a way around that yet. So ask any little old lady who breaks her hip whether she wishes she had a little bit more muscle. We need that muscle. And, this is causing that to decline. Do you know what else causes muscle loss at the same rate as fat loss? Starvation. And that's why these medicines work,
Mhm.
because it's causing you to starve. Now, is that a good way to lose weight, starvation? I don't think so. So this is a big problem, right? And also, we're not really solving the problem. And the way we know that is because if you treat people with Ozempic or Mounjaro or whatever, okay, and they lose weight, okay, 50% of them end up off the medicine within a year. And if they do, if they stop the medicine, they gain all the way back.
Mhm.
So you haven't actually solved the problem. The problem's still there. You've just band-aided it. You just covered it up with the medicine. Okay? That says that we're not actually dealing with the problem. And that's, getting in the way. And then finally, we have the public health advocate hat. All right? Now, these medicines work. I said they did. Okay, I agree. They work. Ozempic, 16% weight loss. Mounjaro, 20% weight loss. That's real weight. I'm not saying no. But that comes at a cost and a financial cost. Okay. If everyone in America who qualified for one of these drugs got them, that would be 2.1 trillion to the healthcare system. And right now, the healthcare system's at 4.1 trillion. So that's a 50% surcharge on top of what we're already paying. We can't afford what we're paying now. How are we going to afford 2.1 trillion? That doesn't make any sense. Okay, for 16 to 20% weight loss. And I'm not saying that's bad. It's good, but at a huge cost.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Conversely, and this is the important part, if we just got sugar consumption in this country down to USDA guidelines, which would mean basically cutting our current sugar consumption in half, we would get a 29% weight loss. And instead of costing 2.1 trillion, we would save 3.0 trillion. So we'd get double the weight loss and we'd save more money than we'd spend.
It'll be a simple solution to a very complex and costly problem. I mean,
So to me, you know, given that I wear all three hats, I think that it's good and appropriate that they're here, but in no way, shape, or form should we be doing what Elon Musk says we should do just because he took it and lost weight. That doesn't have anything to do with anything. Okay. He wants to put basically the entire country on Ozempic, except, of course, he's, cutting, Medicaid and Medicare so that no one will be able to afford it. So, like, how are you going to do that? Um,
maybe
there's an easier way to do this.
maybe he has an unexpected effect on his brain when you took those.
Indeed. Don't think I hadn't thought of that. The fact of the matter is, if we fix the food supply, we'd fix all of this.
I think this is a good way to end this fascinating conversation. I mean, I'm always impressed by your wide range of knowledge and the way you
Thank you.
focus, on put your finger on the main point where we need to attack this. Would you say, as a last sentence, are you an optimist in general or a pessimist in terms of public health?
So, as a human being, I have to tell you, I tend to be a pessimist. My wife will tell you, I'm a gloomer and doomer in general. On this subject, I used to be a pessimist. I'm actually mildly optimistic right now. And the reason is because we've broken through. We've broken through the logjam in terms of the public's understanding. Now, it took 15 years, 20 years to finally break through, but ultimately we've broken through. And this is what happens. And my understanding of changes in public health over time, it fits this same model. Let me give you an example. In 1990, okay, there were four cultural tectonic shifts that started occurring in our public health to today. Okay? Took 30 years for these four cultural tectonic shifts to take hold. Here are the four: bicycle helmets and seatbelts, smoking in public places, drunk driving, condoms in bathrooms. 30 years ago, if a legislator stood up in a state house or parliament or, Congress, Duma, or anywhere else in the world and suggested any, public health measure for any of those four debacles, they'd have gotten laughed right out of town.
Mm-hmm.
Nanny state, liberty interest, get out of my kitchen, get out of my bathroom, get out of my car. Okay. Today, they're all facts of life. No one's belly aching about any of those. We have new things to belly ache about, like vaccines. Okay. But those four, they're settled. They're settled. Okay. So the question is, what happened and why did it take 30 years? And the answer is we taught the children grew up and they voted.
Mm-hmm.
And the naysayers are dead.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. That's why it's a generational shift, because you actually have to start with the children.
And that could happen now as well with the
It
whole.
is. It's happening on food now. Kids want better food. Yes, that's exactly right. So it's not like we're actually going to change today's public. We're going to change tomorrow's public. And we're already doing it. It's already happening. We have a nonprofit called Eat Real, which basically, gets real food into K to 12. Once kids taste real food, they don't like the taste of processed food. There are a lot of things that we can do to try to foment this, but it takes a while. It takes a while. And the point is, I've seen the change. I've lived through this enough so that I've actually seen the change. So, I think RFK, pointing at this, as much as the vaccine thing bothers me, the fact is, he wants to fix the food. Yeah, me too. I want to fix the food too. And I think we, have an opening now to be able to do that. So I'm optimistic now.
Great. So, well, thanks, Robert, for a wonderful conversation. I think this is as inspiring to the people who will listen to this as it has been to me.
Always my pleasure, Emma.
So let's see if we get together again for one of these conversations in 2 or 3 years.
Well, hopefully sooner than that. I'm down at UCLA a lot. I'm a advisor to the Resnick Center, for food policy and obesity. So I get down to UCLA. I'm more worried about you and the wildfires down there.
This has been a close call. I mean, the fire stopped like 2 streets away from us,
Wow.
because we live just above the Palisades in the mountains.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's still, so we finally got a permit to drive down again to PCH.
Wow.
So I can't wait to see that because it's hard to believe that something like this could happen here. Nobody in the Palisades ever thought this would happen.
Yep. Here we are.
Okay, Robert, thanks again.
Always a pleasure.
Take care.
See you soon.
Have a nice weekend.
You too. Bye-bye.